A blinding quantum tractor beam ripped through the dead of night in suburban New Jersey, slamming a 15-ton shit-reeking diesel septic truck and its driver, Gary, straight into the proton reactor core of the Galactic Vanguard fleet's flagship. Gary's ribs ached where the seatbelt had dug in. Cursing a blue streak, he kicked open the crumpled door of his Ford and tumbled out onto a spotless liquid metal deck. Up on the command console, the alien commander stared down at this lower civilization trash with stiff, icy superiority. Right behind them, a critically overloaded proton reactor was vomiting deadly blue light. Gary couldn't give a rat's ass about the glowing alien freaks. All he saw was the flashing red coolant breach, spewing everywhere like a backed-up septic tank. He expertly slipped on a pair of heavy rubber gloves caked in questionable brown grime. Yanking a 4-inch vacuum hose from the back of the rig, he jammed it ruthlessly into the high-energy waste vent, a breach strong enough to collapse a star, and slammed the diesel pump lever on the side of his truck. Gary vaulted back into the cab, his steel-toed boots stomping the gas pedal to the floorboards. The 300,000-mile Cummins diesel engine roared to life with a metal-shredding bellow. Thick black exhaust blasted from the stack, instantly coating two highly sensitive alien sensor panels in greasy soot and sparking miniature electrical fire. The 15-ton vacuum pump engaged at full throttle. The bearings spun so hard they threatened to blow right through the casing. The immense suction snapped the 4-inch hose stiff as a steel pipe, instantly tearing years of baked-on fecal crust from its inner walls. That monstrous vacuum drove straight down the breech into the reactor. The spraying high-energy coolant was violently yanked into a glowing blue fluid whip. Even the crackling plasma sparks floating in midair got sucked into the vortex, vanishing down the hose with a series of muffled pops. Half a ton of semi-fermented human waste churned wildly inside the sealed cast-iron tank, blending with the torrential influx of high-energy sludge to form a macabre, blue, glowing brown slurry. The vacuum gauge on the tank slammed frantically against the red line. The edge gaskets bulged, oozing a few shit-scented methane bubbles. Gary clenched a crumpled Marlboro in his teeth, battered from the teleportation, and jammed his greasy thumb on the dashboard lighter without even blinking. 20 years in the biz, and head-pumped septic tanks that blew way crazier than this. Hell, that old Jewish guy in the suburbs last month? His tank exploded all over the backyard, and Gary had it clean in 30 minutes flat. This leaking alien reactor glowed a bit, sure. But to him, it looked like silly string on Halloween. He even freed up a hand to tap the sequin Jersey stripper sticker on his dash, barking into a headset that had lost its signal light years ago. "You try stiffing me on overtime tonight, Joey, and I swear to God I'll pump your backyard tank and dump it right in your living room." The blue torrent spewing from the breech visibly weakened. The proton reactor, which had been vibrating the entire hull, let out a sharp hiss like a rabid dog getting choked out. Even the ambient high-energy particles were sucked completely dry by the hose. Click! The vacuum gauge on the iron tank pegged itself dead against the absolute top of the red line. The commander's knuckles were bone white, his fingertip already hovering over the flagship's emergency scuttle protocol. Ear-piercing overload alarms threatened to blow the alloy covers right off the command deck. The pulsing red overload index on the holoscreen had hit 99.7%. In exactly 0.3 seconds, the entire proton reactor was supposed to detonate into a plasma fireball that would consume the core. The next second, every single blaring klaxon cut out simultaneously. Dead silence slammed down on everyone's heads. Stiff-necked, the commander looked up. He watched in utter disbelief as the peaked overload curve was violently yanked downward, plunging straight back into the green safety threshold. The pressure reading at the reactor breech starkly displayed negative 0.8 standard atmosphere. That crude hunk of iron, belching black diesel smoke and devoid of even a single quantum sensor chip, had used pure, brute force physical suction to drain high-energy waste fluid capable of shattering half a planet. The commander smashed his fist onto the console, blowing out 3 precision touch panels in a shower of sparks. Assuming the sensor grid had been fried into spitting gibberish, he hammered the diagnostic prompt 3 times. 3 times it returned exactly the same, perfectly safe data. Beside him, the chief adjutant dropped his high-energy ration cup. It clattered against the metal deck, splashing pale blue plasma everywhere. Everyone's olfactory receptors suddenly picked up a strange, foul odor completely alien to the flagship's life support systems. Even the real-time remote telemetry from Galactic High Command stalled out. Nowhere in the entire Galactic Vanguard fleet's tactical database was there a contingency for resolving a proton reactor breach using a vacuum pump. The commander's solid gold epaulets slipped down to his elbows from his frantic movements. He glared at the live holoscreen feed, locking his eyes on that absurdly thick black rubber hose. The breach that had been spewing high-energy steam wasn't emitting so much as a spark anymore. Instead, from the seam of the hose fitting, a single viscous drop of dark brown liquid was slowly oozing out. Gary's fingers hooked the vacuum hose's quick-release clamp. Clack! He popped it open, yanking the heavy black rubber tube from the reactor breech with a residual shudder. He casually gave the nozzle a couple of shakes toward the truck's tank, then slapped the high-pressure seal valve on the rig shut with a resounding clang. He clapped his shit-caked rubber gloves together, his thumb brushing over some old scratches worn in by the hose. With his other hand, he gave the side of the cast-iron tank 2 solid thumps. The hollow boom rattled the sequin stripper sticker on his dashboard. The Cummins diesel hummed along at a perfect, steady idle, not skipping a single beat. Leaning into the cab, he fished a grease-slicked invoice book from his inner breast pocket. The ballpoint pen clipped to the cover was still smeared with grime from his last drain-snaking gig. Leaning against his tire, crushed Marlboro dangling from his lip, he scribbled wildly on the yellowed receipt. First line, emergency evacuation service. Price, $2,000. He paused for a second, then tacked on another $700 for a hazardous environment call-out fee. Not a bad haul for a night's work. Rip! He tore the invoice off the pad, pinched the edge, and gave it a little flick. Looking up, he finally noticed the room full of alien suits gathered around the command deck. They were completely frozen, like somebody had superglued their boots to the deck. Every single sensory organ strapped to the sides of their heads was deadlocked on the swaying nozzle of his vacuum hose. Gary held up the crinkled bill, scowled, and bellowed in his thickest Jersey roar, "Hey! Which one of you assholes is in charge? When's this pump-out getting settled?" The commander's toes spasmed before his conscious mind could even react. Through his precision ocular filters, he watched the transparent thread of slime hanging from the nozzle snap. The brownish bead of liquid wobbled. Carrying the residual heat of half a ton of bio-waste and proton coolant, it plummeted and went splat onto the mirror-polished alloy deck of the flagship's core module. The micro-level air purification system crashed almost instantly. A toxic cocktail of rotting organic matter, high-concentration ammonia, and ionizing radiation hit the commander like a red-hot poker. It jammed itself brutally into olfactory receptors that had evolved over 10,000 years solely to perceive pure, high-dimensional particles. To his left, the chief adjutant let out a shrieking hiss that didn't even sound biological. The identity token slipped from his fingers, clattering onto a sparking touch panel and triggering a cascade of blinding red error codes. The remaining senior officers locked up, their muscles seizing in rigid terror. Their immaculately groomed, scaled gill flaps flared open and shut in a frantic, uncontrollable spasm. Even their aristocratic bloodline badges began to smoke and spit blue sparks from sensory overload. The commander's retinas burned a searing, bloody crimson. He gripped his solid gold Star Corps insignia so hard his knuckles nearly cracked the plating. As the putrid, ammonia-laced fog invaded his respiratory tract, he violently clutched his face. 30,000 years of evolution had never prepared his species for the physiological reflex of nausea. It utterly shattered his neural defenses. His knees buckled. The 400-pound alien collapsed onto the mirrored deck with a heavy thud. Lacking the anatomical structure to vomit, his body forcefully engaged the reflex anyway. Arching his back, he heaved violently, choking out a grotesque, metallic scraping sound. Nothing came up. Only a searing fire ripping up his windpipe straight to his skull. The senior adjutants around him went down like scythed wheat. 2 pure-blood aristocratic officers saw their chest insignias overload and explode in tiny blue bursts. They immediately hit the deck, frothing at the mouth and convulsing in the muck. The chief adjutant's gill flaps flared so hard they nearly dislocated before he fell straight backward. His skull smashed into a sparking touch panel, knocking the abandoned identity token into a frenzy of flashing red errors. The commander's vision blurred into a toxic haze. He blindly pawed at the sticky deck 3 times before his fingers snagged the emergency comms unit on the side of the console. Trembling, he crushed the semi-transparent buttons right through the glass. His roar, garbled by acidic mucus, nearly blew out the tactical channel. 50 Space Marines. Outer perimeter detail. Breach the core immediately. Maximum priority biohazard suppression protocol. Entire command element facing imminent incapacitation. A sharp buzz of tactical acknowledgments flooded the channel. The heavy, rhythmic thud of alloy power boots stomping down the corridor grew louder. The core's blast-proof hydraulic locks shrieked as they depressurized. A half-meter thick, high-strength alloy blast door began to slide inward with a cold metallic grind. Gary puffed his crushed Marlboro, ready to hunt down the paralyzed commander for a signature. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught the massive blast door sliding open. 50 Space Marines, clad in matte silver power armor, stormed in on heavy boots. Every thud against the deck kicked up a spray of sparks from the spilled high-energy waste. These guys moved like lightning. They raised their plasma pikes in perfect unison, the blades humming with pale blue light. In under 3 seconds, they had Gary's 15-ton rig boxed in tighter than a drum. At least 3 targeting lasers painted the crack of his discharge valve. Gary lost his shit. He waved his invoice in the air, the paper flapping wildly. Jamming a shit-stained rubber finger straight at the helmet of the lead Marine, he stomped his boot hard on the truck's steel step. "I drove my ass all the way out here to fix your leak and wipe your asses. You don't want to pay up? Fine. But you surround my rig with an army? You trying to bust my livelihood? Let me tell you something, pal. No Jersey septic guy gets stiffed on a bill. You ain't living till I get every damn dime." The high-precision biosensors built into the Marine captain's tactical respirator took one single breath of the Corps' air. They instantly blew out with a violent crackle, maxing the HUD into the red. Stepping over 2 foaming aristocrats and a sparking panel, the captain didn't understand a single word of the Jersey profanity this grease-stained human was screaming. He assumed it was the battle cry of some unknown lower-tier civilization. The captain raised his armored right hand, smashing his knuckle into the comms relay to silence the chaotic chatter of his 50 men. Moving with the synchronized precision of machine gears, the squad leveled their plasma pikes. The pale blue superheated blades flared to life one by one. Their hum drowned out the dying screech of the air purifiers. Dozens of crimson targeting lasers painted every inch of the 15-ton diesel truck. They locked onto the exhaust stack vents and dead-centered the half-visible stripper sticker on the dashboard. The captain's thumb hovered over the extreme vaporization setting on his weapons grip. According to the Galactic Vanguard Fleet's highest security doctrine, any confirmed biocontamination source had to be reduced to ionized gas. Not a microgram of ash was permitted to remain. Staring straight at the human in the center of his visor, still stubbornly holding up that crumpled piece of paper, the captain applied pressure to his thumb, ready to order open fire. Dozens of scarlet lasers swept across the invoice in Gary's hand, burning tiny charred holes right through the bolded $2,700 figure. The Marlboro butt in Gary's mouth twitched violently. Ash fell onto his muck-covered glove. "Wanna burn my rig to dodge a bill, huh?" He shoved the scorched invoice into the backband of his work pants. The ache in his ribs from the seatbelt was completely vaporized by pure, unadulterated rage. In 2 strides, he was at the massive valve assembly on the back of his septic truck. Planting his rubber-treaded boots, he delivered a vicious kick to the rusted cast steel locking latch. Clang! The massive lock snapped clean out of its groove, flying through the air and sparking off the alien deck. Gary's calloused hand clamped down on the yellow and black hazard release lever. His forearm muscles bulged. His knuckles went dead white. He wrenched the lever toward his chest with everything he had. The Cummins engine's roar spiked 2 octaves. The full power booster pump's gears began to grind with a bone-rattling mechanical scream. Inside the sealed iron tank, half a ton of fermenting shit and alien sludge was thrust forward under 10 atmospheres of pressure. It slammed into the tank walls with the sound of muffled thunder. The heavy dust cap over the discharge port began to bulge and shudder under the immense fluid pressure. The heavy cap blew off with a deafening bang. It slammed squarely into the chest plate of the Point Marine, caving the armor inward. Driven by 10 atmospheres of pressure, a vile geyser of raw fermented sewage, methane, and biting ammonia erupted outward. Laced with crackling blue high-energy sparks, the thick brown sludge arched through the air, fanning out into a 20-meter-wide tidal wave of filth. The air immediately filled with a sour, acidic stench, potent enough to pit metal panels. The gale force wind from the blast knocked Gary's Marlboro sideways. He spit a glob of nicotine-stained saliva into his palm and glared at the wave of shit crashing down on the silver-armored soldiers. "Burn my $2,700 bill, will ya?" He roared at the top of his lungs. "If I don't snake the drains of every last one of you alien bastards' brains today, my name ain't Gary." The Marine captain's tactical visor was instantly plastered with a thick layer of brown sludge. His already ruined biosensors outright caught fire inside his helmet, filling his nose with the stench of burning plastic before a single chemical breakdown could be transmitted to command. He ground his molars together. His knuckles turned pale green as he gripped the plasma pike, instinctively pushing the weapon to maximum output. He was trying to follow standard Fleet Marine doctrine, vaporize the incoming threat instantly. The Point Marine, with the caved-in chest plate, thrust his pike into the incoming wave. The 10,000-degree plasma jet licked the methane-laced biosludge. An immediate blinding white steam cloud detonated. A scorching shockwave of hydrogen sulfide drove straight into the cooling vents of their power armor. Inside the captain's earpiece, the weapon failure alarms of 50 Marines ruptured his eardrums simultaneously. Every single plasma pike's internal containment field shrieked in synchronized collapse. The silver alloy casings of the pikes visibly heated to a glowing red, sparking violent blue-purple arcs from their seams. The captain's fingers shook as he reached for the emergency dump switch on his weapon panel. The grip was already hot enough to burn through his tactical glove. A deep, pressurized roar rumbled from the core of the pike. The first deafening explosion shattered the hum of the core. The pikes of the 3 frontline Marines blew violently apart into chunks of superheated shrapnel. A tidal wave of feces propelled by the blast and riding a 250-degree steam cloud slammed ruthlessly into the formation. The remaining 47 critical plasma pikes chain detonated. Blue-purple plasma fire and raw septic sludge sprayed wildly in every direction. The foul mixture forced its way into every exhaust port, comms jack, and joint seal of their power armor. The shockwave hurled the captain into the bulkhead. His shit-caked tactical visor completely lost imaging, dissolving into a blizzard of static. The smell of his scorched biosensors mixed with the ultra-concentrated hydrogen sulfide bleeding through his filters. It hit his genetically enhanced olfactory nerves like a red-hot needle, causing his very lungs to spasm. He desperately tried to push himself up, but his palms found nothing but slick, fermented grime on the deck. The moment he applied force, he face-planted back into ankle-deep sludge. The comms channel was a chorus of agonizing dry heaves and the shrieks of his men. 50 suits of top-tier power armor, costing enough to outfit an entire colony world garrison, flashed red critical life support failure. The thick filth cementing their joint actuators locked them down so tight they couldn't even raise an arm. The alien commander's retinas bled from the sheer hydrogen sulfide exposure. Clutching the filth-covered console to pull himself up, he watched the entire tactical holowall explode into a blinding red cascade of warning. The tactical icons for 50 Space Marines winked out on the screen in under a second, like ants under a magnifying glass. His comms unit was gridlocked with chaotic screams. Not a single coherent tactical report came through. Just the lung-tearing dry heaving of elite soldiers and the sickening screech of power armor joints seizing up with sewage. It took him 3 full seconds to accept the impossible reality. His ace battalion, a unit that had crushed half the galaxy under its heel, hadn't even scratched this adversary. They were completely annihilated in 10 seconds flat. He scrambled desperately toward the self-destruct protocol interface on the main console. The moment his fingertip touched the icy quantum sensor layer, a glob of slick, brown bioslime squeezed out of the panel seam. The 300 million credit quantum biometric scanner shorted out in a burst of blue sparks. He hammered the maximum clearance self-destruct trigger 3 times. The screen only vomited corrupted error text. Not a single detonation sequence initialized. He frantically dug at the grime in the panel gaps with his fingernails. One of his gold-trimmed command talons snapped clean off. His hands were covered in a sewage sludge so vile it made his temples throb, and he couldn't successfully press a single button. Gary slapped his hand hard on the cast-iron knob of the discharge valve. Clack! The backflow pipe locked shut. The final tremor from the vacuum pump traveled up his arm, making his wrist tingle. He flicked a stray drop of muck off his heavy rubber glove. Spitting out a flake of tobacco blown into his mouth by the pressure wave, he stepped down from the truck's steel running board. His heavy boots sank into the sludge with a thick squelch. 50 suits of power armor lay scattered haphazardly across the deck, sparking wildly. The Space Marines trapped inside let out muffled groans through their visors. A couple of overloaded life support systems were still venting hydrogen sulfide steam. Gary didn't even break his stride. He stomped right over the shoulder pauldron of the nearest suit. His boots crushed the warped remains of a plasma pike, grinding the metal shards into the muck with a piercing scrape. Reaching into his breast pocket, he pulled out the curled $2,700 invoice. He brushed a speck of brown mud off the cover and flattened out the dog-eared corners. The reverberations of the Jersey diesel engine still rattled around the chamber. Gary marched up the filth-covered steps to the command deck, leaving perfect muddy boot prints in his wake. The suffocating, high-concentration stench of the room didn't faze him in the slightest. It smelled exactly like a Tuesday in his own backyard. He stopped half a pace behind the paralyzed alien commander. Smack! He slapped the invoice down right next to the commander's muck-drenched hand. The commander's bleeding retinas made his vision tremble. He watched those thick, shit-flecked work boots step over the writhing bodies of his space marines. Every drop of sticky filth falling from those soles burned a bubbling crater into the flagship's pristine command deck. He shrank back as hard as he could. His broken, gold-trimmed fingernail dragged across the icy alloy console, leaving a jagged white scratch. The tactical database that had orchestrated the destruction of 7 colony worlds was completely scrambled in his brain. Every Supreme Clearance command he tried to bark died on his tongue, devolving into uncontrollable dry heaves. The chief adjutant collapsed beside him was still twitching unconsciously. The 300 million credit quantum scanner spat blue sparks. The holoscreen was barfing corrupted text that looked, to the commander, like bizarre alien schematics for septic plumbing. His hypersensitive olfactory receptors were totally flooded with methane and fermented feces. He couldn't muster the physical strength to even raise his arm. His biological command armor, designed to withstand stellar radiation, went soft as melted wax under the sheer corrosive power of the stench. He watched helplessly as that heavy rubber glove breached his peripheral vision. Smack! The flattened $2,700 paper invoice was firmly planted by his sweat-slicked hand. The rough edge of the paper grazed his bleeding knuckles. The heavy, solid gold Star Corps insignia on his chest dug painfully into his ribs as he shivered. He stared dead at that human wrist hovering inches away, noticing the stray fleck of tobacco on the glove. Even his deep-seated genetic self-defense instincts were totally paralyzed in his synapses. Shaking like a leaf, he braced himself for what he assumed would be the most barbaric execution imaginable. Gary flicked the ash from his Marlboro right onto the back of the commander's spastic, trembling hand. He didn't even give the commander's pale, waiting for execution face a second glance. He was annoyed this coward was stalling his knockoff time. He just wanted to go home and crush a double cheeseburger. Gary reached out with his shit-caked rubber glove. His fingers hooked the obnoxiously shiny, solid gold Star Corps insignia on the commander's chest. Before the alien could react, Gary flicked his wrist. He ripped the incredibly priceless badge clean off, snapping 3-star embroidered gold threads in the process. He tossed the heavy chunk of metal into the tin toolbox hanging off his hip. It landed between his drain snake and a 19mm wrench with a heavy clunk, rattling the lid 3 times. Gary grabbed the perfectly flattened $2,700 invoice with his other hand and backhanded the commander right across the face with it. The stiff edge of the copy paper scratched the commander's bleeding sclera. The sharp pain made him violently flinch, grinding his broken gold nail against the console and carving another glaring white scratch. Don't play dead to skip the bill. Gary spit out a piece of rogue tobacco, his booming voice shorting out the holoscreen next to him. This emergency pump-out ain't cheap. I'm taking this shiny badge as a down payment. You figure out how to settle the rest. You short me 1 dime and I'll pump out every single life support filter on this tin can and use it to fill the septic tank in my backyard. Before the echo of the badge hitting the toolbox even faded, Gary's boot crushed the commander's broken gold-trimmed fingernail against the metal deck. He spun on his heel and strode back toward his rig. Grabbing the rusted metal handle on the cab, he hauled himself up the 3 steps. He planted his ass hard on the torn pleather seat and slammed his palm dead center on the steering wheel's air horn. Honk! The harsh, deafening blast of compressed air made the sensory antennae of the paralyzed adjutants on the floor twitch wildly. The corrupted holoscreen vomited a string of meaningless error codes and showered sparks everywhere. Gary kept the crooked Marlboro clenched in his teeth. He tapped a dirty rubber finger against the massive holographic star map floating outside his windshield. The numbness in his wrist from the vacuum pump hadn't even completely faded. He shook the discharge valve lever in his other hand. His gritty Jersey roar easily overpowered the idling diesel engine. "Don't try that deadbeat bullshit with me. I ain't got all night to screw around in your flying trash can. My wife's waiting on me to fix our leaky tank out back. Now you work that console and fire up that quantum beam thing. You put this truck exactly back in that suburban dirt lot where you grabbed it this morning. If you drop me half a yard off the mark, it'll fire up the main pump, suck the filters clean out of your ship's life support, and use them for fertilizer." He lightly tapped the gas pedal. The Cummins engine revved up 2 decibels. The vacuum pump needle instantly spiked toward the red line. The vibrations shook the sequined Jersey stripper sticker straight down below the dashboard. The alien commander's sensory antennae were completely numb from the engine's roar. The blood spots in his retinas throbbed violently as the cold light of the pump's red line gauge glared in his eyes. His foot slipped in the muck, accidentally grinding over his own broken gold nail as he stumbled toward the main console. The 300 million credit scanner was still spitting blue fire. The moment he reached for it, a stray shock paralyzed his arm. Without a second thought, he threw himself at the only surviving manual backup terminal that hadn't been flooded with sewage. The glory of the Vanguard fleet, the sanctity of the proton reactor. All of it was utterly pulverized by the low-frequency rumble of that diesel pump. He only had one coherent thought left. If that infernal diesel pump ran for 2 more seconds, every single life support filter on the ship would be sucked completely dry. Every crack and crevice of the Flagship would be flooded with the stench of an Earth septic tank. Not even the high-dimensional purification incense he had hoarded in his private quarters for 3 centuries would save them. His trembling fingers rapidly punched the quantum tractor beam activation code into the panel. His knuckles were white. He didn't even notice the 3 snapped gold threads fluttering on his hand. The second he punched in the final confirmation keystroke, he looked up. A blinding blue teleportation light enveloped the undercarriage of the 15-ton steel septic truck. From inside the cab, Gary lifted his heavy, shit-smeared rubber glove and gave him the unmistakable pay-me hand gesture right through the glass. The blue light flashed. The entire septic truck, along with a piece of alien floor plating wedged in its tire treads, vanished completely from the Flagship's core module. All that was left was a sprawling pool of brown sludge, a pile of frothing senior officers, and 50 suits of power armor, constantly spitting sparks and venting hot hydrogen sulfide. The commander's legs gave out. He collapsed into the muddy deck. A scalding wave of humiliation rushed up his spine into his skull. 70 years of military service. 12 high-dimensional civilizations conquered. 3 galactic rebel strongholds razed to the ground. And today, a septic tank cleaner from New Jersey had ruthlessly swiped his solid gold Star Corps insignia, the ultimate symbol of his supreme authority, and bullied him into using the Flagship's absolute highest clearance quantum tractor beam just to drop his shit truck back at a suburban parking spot. He just barely propped himself up off the deck when every single surviving public PA speaker on the ship suddenly crackled to life. Gary's grating, sandpaper voice blasted through the ship. The bastard hadn't bothered to turn off his CB radio before he left. "Hey, Joey. It's Gary. Just knocked out some crazy rush job. Be back in 30? That house with the backed-up tank out back? I'll swing by and pump it next. Don't touch my attendance bonus. Oh, and I just scored some solid gold badge thing. I'll swing by your place later and trade it for a couple cold ones." His voice echoed through the Flagship's comm circuits into every single compartment. Every trapped space marine and every surviving crew member heard that casual, thick Jersey complaint in the exact same second. At that moment, the Galactic Vanguard fleet's trillion-credit Flagship was permanently branded, from its quantum core to its outer armor, by a septic tank cleaner from Earth.
Man, I can't get over that image. A galactic alien warlord crying in a puddle of Jersey sewage, while Gary casually snatches his solid gold badge just to pay for a pump-out. Hell yeah. You don't need plasma rifles when you've got a dirty diesel truck and a blue-collar guy who just wants to go home for a cheeseburger. Absolutely badass. So, let me ask you guys, if an alien death fleet crash landed in your backyard today, what piece of everyday junk are you using to send them packing? Drop it in the comments. And hey, if you loved this crazy story, smash that like button and subscribe. Catch you next time.